What's up, everybody? Today, I'm eager to welcome Justin Wells back to practice some conversation craft here in the Yours Truly virtual studio today. Justin was one of my first guests on the podcast. As I was exploring this little corner of the internet, I came across his channel where he has done some heavy lifting covering Justin Booker's work on the 7 basic plots. And listening to Justin pluck on the strings of intrinsic truth found in the fabric of story, I resonated deeply, as I have been transformed, touching this truth found in the ancient stories of old. And in some further digging, I found the book he wrote entitled How to Film Truth, the story of documentary film as a spiritual journey. Justin is an author, college professor, philosopher, Emmy Award-winning camera operator in Hollywood, and a citizen over here in this little corner of the internet, as he's been a student of the J Cubed University, studying the work of Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Peugeot, and John Vervaeke, and gone to Sunday school at Pastor Paul Vanderklay's digital church, like many of us here in the YouTube algorithmic magisterium. Justin reached out to me a few weeks ago after Paul Vanderklay gave Sean Cohen's interface with John Vervaeke's work, the PVK treatment. Link to that conversation will be in the description. And tossed around the idea of following up on that conversation, along with his conversation with Paul Antleitner about story. I said, let's go, and thought that it will fit nicely into the series of conversations I'm already having about creativity here in this little corner of the internet. If you'd like to support the channel, give it a like and a subscribe. If it makes sense, share it with friends. And if you believe that yours truly is something that might be described as worthwhile, you can support the channel financially by becoming a channel member. So check that out, link in the description. I got to meet Justin face to face at the Symbolic World Summit earlier this year, and it was quite something, as we had just had an initial virtual conversation. Since then, we've been able to build on that connection through more conversations on this podcast. If you don't follow Justin on X, you're missing out, as it is a peek into his ever-deepening work on story. And give him a search on YouTube as well, as he's had several other fascinating conversations with people like Paul Antleitner, Burn Power, and others. So sit back, clock in, sit down with the baby for a nap, start some chores, or hit the road and join me in this newfound time we've all discovered together here in podcast land, as Justin and I practice some conversation craft here on the Yours Truly podcast. So without any further delay, I give you Justin Wells. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. Glad to have you back, man.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, dude. So here we are, kind of doing this series on creativity. You hit me up. You've been looking, at story for a long time, but interfacing in this interesting time with the work that John Vervaeke is doing. And he had a recent conversation with Sean Cohen. We talked about this in our last podcast conversation. But you have been churning out stuff on Twitter like crazy. So there's something going on for you creatively. And I want to continue to have that conversation with you to help process it, think out loud, help along that journey. Cause I think that can be helpful sometimes. So I don't know where you want to take this, but I'm kind of like, lead on with kind of where you're going, where you're at, what you're seeing.
Yeah. So my new goal, if you were to take, kind of a little bit of a reset in terms of let's focus on the North Star here. What is how can I maximize the things that I do more effortlessly, my strengths, and delegate out my weaknesses, and I think that the reset that I'm doing is really to say, okay, I'm going to do whatever it takes over the next 5 years or 10 years or however long it takes to be, the hitting coach who can fix anyone's swing, with story. When it comes to story, if you have a creative project, you have something and you're like, hey, can you help me bring this to the next level? I want to be the one who can do that for any type of hitter, you know, not just what I noticed a lot of times with writing instructors when I was in grad school was that people would be the authority that they would have to teach would be that they were good at whatever it was that they do, which means that the genre that they worked in and the voice that they used in their work, they would show you how they did that, you know, and it was a high level, you know, of excellence. But if that wasn't exactly what your creative identity was, or I kind of think of your persona, your artistic persona, almost like a genre. And if you're working in a different genre, you know, like Steve Martin, the genre of Steve Martin is very different than the genre of Martin Scorsese, right? And so if you're the hitting coach who can fix anyone's swing, you have to know how Steve Martin works, and you have to know how Martin Scorsese works. And so that's kind of been my goal. As I said, okay, you know, I did, as you mentioned in your introduction, these lectures on the 7 basic plots, because I just figured I need to start somewhere. I want to go from wherever we're at story-wise in our culture, upstream to the headwaters, to the source, and figure this out. Figure out what is a good story. How do I know the difference between a good and better, or good and bad? And how do I get more than just me, but any influential circles I have to really tap into the actual purpose and power of storytelling and storycraft. So I started with 7 basic plots, and now I'm moving into this story grid universe, which is what we talked about last time, which is kind of a combination of the best of the Christopher Vogler, who wrote The Writer's Journey based on Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, and Robert McKee, who is really the kind of big guru in Hollywood in terms of storycraft. And so it's such a deep dive that I kind of stopped doing the 7 basic plots lectures, and I said, okay, I'm going to start pretty much developing my own approach to story. And once I have that, I think, figured out, then I'll start in with the lectures again on my channel.
Well, that's awesome. It's awesome for you know, you're getting this inspiration, you're encountering some things, you're seeing something, a hole in the culture or something, and now you're honing in, you're kind of solidifying, you're setting a goal of seeing where you can play your part. I mean, there's meta things happening here, like you're in your own journey. You know, I'm thinking about mine and all those types of things, but at the same time, you know, becoming a story coach, I think I mean, you're in LA, so there's probably certain parts where there's people that kind of coach in that. Obviously, you talk about teaching, but in this, I can't help but think, and we've hit on this multiple times, that it does seem like there is a struggle to tell good stories right now, and people have lost that art, and even to tell new stories. I just started. My wife and I were like trying to figure out something to watch last night, and we started this. They revamped Matlock. Well, some of the acting was poor, and it was the first episode of the first season, so I kind of was like, you know, they're trying to figure out chemistry, and who knows. But there's also, you know, this person's getting this role to fill a diversity quota. You can just kind of see some of the things happening, and that are tells right now in what is trying to be past a story, you know. And you know, they did get I can't remember her name. She's very famous. She was the unsinkable, I don't remember, from Titanic.
Kimmy Schmidt. Oh no, unsinkable.
Molly, I can't remember. She's a famous actor, but she's playing the new Matlock version. Anyways, I can't remember her name. She was, I don't know, Kathy. Is it Kathy Bateman? I think it's Kathy.
Kathy Bates.
Kathy Bates, yes.
Yeah.
So,
she's a wonderful actress. Yeah.
Yeah. So she, you know, she was fun to watch. But anyways, we're talking about new stories, and all our culture just seems to be churning is like, run these IPs, you know, over and over again, because we're stuck. And so, I mean, that's what I'm hearing and you're like, kind of like, this inspiration is going through you like crazy. Kind of, you know, retell, I guess, some of the, because on our last conversation, I feel like you were still trying to like work out some of this, and we're kind of playing with that. And it's so like frame that conversation and kind of the John Vervaeke influence on story that you're seeing into now, you've got some more clarity. I don't know. That's kind of
Sure. Okay, so here's where I'm at right now. And you'll see me kind of circling around this with Twitter. I just use Twitter as a notebook, note taking, and it's in public. So if what I write on there doesn't make sense to you, don't worry, just skip it. It's really mostly for me. But so where I'm at right now, okay, so I'm trying to go upstream, and you're exactly right in the sense that I really believe in this distinction that Owen Barfield makes between meaning and expression. Both need each other, so that you got the blueprint and you got the house. And if the house is not following the blueprint very well, then that's bad expression. But if the blueprint is terrible, then the house is not going to be good. So you have to think of a lot of Hollywood is expression, because it's like, okay, let's take this best-selling novel and now let's express it, let's incarnate it as a movie. So Hollywood is very, very good at expression. And the question is, okay, but when it gets disconnected from meaning, what happens? When the blueprints aren't as good, maybe, that's kind of why I'm thinking, what I'd like to do is go upstream and really look at those blueprints and say, okay, how do we take the best of what's been passed down to us and express that. So where I'm at right now is sort of figuring out if we are, and I'm not saying that we're lost and we're off the path or anything like that. There's still a lot of good stuff coming out, and part of what happens when you get a little bit older is you start to say, well, it was better when I was a kid or something, but that may not be true. That's just you getting older. And so I'm not knocking anybody right now, but what I'm saying is I want to really establish a connection to the source so that I can point people in the right direction when they say, hey, how do I impact people emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, etc., in all the different ways with a story. So what I'm doing is I'm tracing the steps back from where we are back to how we got to here. And so it goes through the hero's journey, really, so what I'm trying to figure out is going back to Carl Jung and Freud and Maslow and all of these psychologists who really became the new priesthood of the 20th century. I think of it like a field guide. If you're using the hero's journey, let's say, or if you're using the archetypes, you're using one of these tools, and the field guide says, here's everything in the forest. If you're about to go and survive in the forest, everything that's edible, these are all the nuts and berries that are edible. Okay. And you're like, great. Okay, I'm going to use that. And you go out in the forest. Then somebody stops you and says, no, wait. One of those is not edible, and it's that one. Okay. And then what would you do? You'd say, oh, okay, that's good to know. And you'd cross it off, but you wouldn't throw out the whole book. That's how I kind of feel about Carl Jung is, okay, what he did was he was cut off from the religious metaphysic because his father, who was a minister, had a crisis of faith. So him as an individual sort of had the same experience as Europe as a whole, which is this sort of Nietzschean death of God sense of the loss of the connection to the transcendent. And he didn't know what to do. And so he took the entire cosmos and put it inside of the human mind and said, these are, and now everything's inside here. All that meaning making machinery now, all those archetypes are inside your head. And so you can have a sense of the same landscape, the underworld, Middle Earth, and paradise. You can have, all these things, but you don't have to. If the religious metaphysic is no longer a live option for you, you can still use this. And so the question for me is, well, what if he was wrong about about the religious metaphysic? And this is what most Christian critiques of him will say. Well, he was wrong about that. He didn't believe in this, that, and I do. Okay. But that's not the question that I have. The question that I have is, was he right about the collective unconscious? Was he right about these archetypes? Is there such a thing as a threshold guardian and a trickster and a shapeshifter and a shadow? Because that's what everybody uses as writing tools in Hollywood and also in the novel world. And so it's like that field guide. Okay, I've got it in front of me. Now, what's edible and what's not edible? Okay. So most of the I went looking because I'm working on this book called The Story of the Hero's Journey. And I asked all my friends who are influential in the story world and in Christianity. And I said, do you have any theological interactions between the theologians and Carl Jung? And the only thing I could find was entirely in the propositional realm. In other words, it was, well, I believe this and he doesn't believe that. Therefore, he does not compatible with me, However,
he's heretic, he's poisonous berry. Is that kind of?
Yes. And so they would take the whole field guide and just throw it out. Okay, get rid of that. We don't need that. Just don't even think about it. Don't talk about it. However, they still probably believe, or at least act according to a sense that we have an unconscious, like the conscious and the unconscious. We pretty much take that for granted. Same thing with Freud. It's sort of like everything we don't like about Freud, but meanwhile, everything that Freud got right, we just intuitively assume because that's in the water we drink, so that's kind of where I'm at. I'm sorry. I went on a little long there. That's where I'm at with my exploration. And now I'm going to go from Jung. Once I figure out what's poison and what's not poison, but what's edible and what's not edible. And then I'll move to Campbell, and then I'll move to Robert McKee, and then I'll move up to now. That's kind of where I'm at.
Well, it makes sense that in this space, because, Peterson kind of broke that wide open in a certain, he talked about, well, who's the theologian talking about what's good? And it's like one guy who's a psychologist, actually, he's a psychologist looking at the theology, not a theologian looking at the psychology kind of type thing. And so that's really interesting. But then I guess what the other piece of it was, you talked about only the ideas. So I can't accept this idea because it's the wrong proposition. So then we're done. So what is it within how Vervaeke is kind of helping build a bridge right now that you're seeing?
Yeah. So, I think in psychology has really gone, as a discipline, has really gone through several iterations. If you go back, and I love intellectual history. So I like to go and read, I went to Freud's house in Vienna, and I went into his little office, and I thought, man, what it would have been like to be him, trying to figure all this stuff out at the time, and going to Switzerland and meeting his buddy, Carl Jung, and then having a falling out and all that stuff. So it went from there, which is kind of a real sense to rescue us from complete nihilism, because that's where they were at the time. You can't use religion anymore to find meaning in your life. Because it was in a post-Nietzschean world. It was a post-death of God world. Freud thought that religion was a wish fulfillment dream. Jung had a thing over his door that says something like, even if unspoken, the God is still present. So he still was trying to maintain that. But both of them, it was this sense of, it would be like if you and I, there's something that you and I just can't believe in. Like the moon landing was faked or something like that, and everybody around us believes the moon landing was faked, and you go, well, I'm sorry, that's not a live option for me. I can't make myself believe that. That's where they were. But then as it kind of moved on, it took on a lot of the roles that your local priest in your local parish, or your local pastor, your confessor would perform for you, which is somebody who is a spiritual guide who's going to bring you along into spiritual maturity. So there's a real trajectory, a narrative trajectory of immaturity to maturity. So then now it's like in a Woody Allen film, by the time you get up to the 70s, it's like, well, my analyst says this, my analyst says that. That's the guru, that's the wise man, that's the spiritual advisor but it's a secular wise man and spiritual advisor. And so it's really, John Vervaeke is a perfect example of moving past that and saying, okay, now we've had these secular priests for, 80, 90 years. Did they do a good job? So he's talking about the meaning crisis, and it's like, that's pretty much what they were trying to solve without I feel like it's sort of like when I would rock climb when I was younger, and you'd go to these rock walls and you'd want to do the harder climb. You say, well, that one's off limit. You can't use that handhold. You got to use these ones over here. So that's what it was like. If you cut off the religious metaphysic, all of that machinery for meaning making is now, you can't use it. And so that's what Vervaeke is doing, I think, in a way. And his interfacing with Jonathan is, well, should we start using these handholds again? Or how can we now? Again, it wasn't as if it was Carl Jung didn't want to use those handholds. It was, he witnessed this religious crisis in his own father, and so it's not easy. It's easier. You might think it's easy, but maybe it's not as easy as we think. So I think John is really using the new work in positive psychology, and positive psychology is a big development, and then cognitive science, to start to understand just how meaning making, or tapping into a meaning system, or having a sense of meaning in your life even works. And he's doing the same thing. He's kind of retracing those steps back. Okay, this psychology didn't really work, like what Jung and Freud were trying to do. Let's just be honest. Now we've had enough time to evaluate it. It didn't really work. So now John is saying, should we go back to Plato? Should we go back to Socrates? Right. Jonathan is saying we should just go right back to the old school pre-Enlightenment religion. Paul Vanderklay is going, well, I've never stopped, but I've been over marginalized in a little niche in the corner over here, and that's kind of where those three are in that.
Yeah.
Well, in that path.
The thing that's coming up to me is I was thinking about, you and I were both at Symbolic World, and that was a lot of, Jonathan he's a visual artist, and deals with symbology in kind of like the traditional artistic sense of painting or sculpting, or in illustration. He's with his comic books, and and so a lot of the thrust there, by nature of his interest, and he sees it in the architecture, and in the cathedral, or the temple. And what's interesting about, as I think about what you're doing, and then Vervaeke's interface, with Sean, is that project is now underway with, and I've had conversation with some musicians, Matt Hylam, deeply influenced by Peterson and McGilchrist and Vervaeke, like all of it, and with Neil from Dirt Poor Robins, but where you're at, and in my conversation with James Taylor Foreman that I was pointing, because y'all are both in LA, I'd love for you guys to meet, is Hollywood hasn't contended yet with, you have the logos, or the logo disseminating in these other fields, and you're connected, like you said, within the circles of influence that you have in Hollywood, the traditional space where a lot of this with cinema and visual storytelling has. And so I think that's what's exciting about having this conversation with you, and where that's at, and why your take on this, with Martin, the corner folk of Martin Shaw and Bijou and everybody, is like, can we figure out how to get this in here? And that is exciting. I think that is exciting, and I see that excitement coming out in you, and so I'm happy to hear that you're continuing to develop this, because there could be some, it could be revolutionary, or revitalizing to that space.
Let me say one thing about Hollywood. So here's my contention with Hollywood. Hollywood, because they have to be, they actually have to make the story work. And making a story work means you have to hit a lot of different things, emotional valences, basically conflict, and that has to be believable, and motivations and character arcs and growths. You know, basically the methods of storytelling borrow so much from Christendom. You know, the notion of sanctification, which is or sanctification or theosis, if you're talking in Orthodox, which is this notion of character growth. There's repentance cycles in it. You know, when you have to rethink, you have worldview 1.0, you reach the all is lost moment, then you have worldview 2.0. And what's the thing that you do that changes? It's called repentance. But they don't use the same words because of the status markers of what you have to say to be cool. And I'm going to give you a very specific example. Did I tell you this before about Robert McKee? Okay.
Maybe.
So Robert McKee's the main story guru in Hollywood. When I took his seminar, it was kind of in the late aughts, and it was at the height of the New Atheist movement. So at the time, it was trendy to bag on religion, to say that religion was evil, you know. And so when I took his seminar, everybody from Disney was there, and the row in front of me, I said, "Hey, where are you guys from?" They said, "Oh, we're all on the clock. We're from Disney," you know. And then there was another one from Pixar, and Drew Barrymore was in it with me, and some other celebrity. She was starting her directing career. And he got up and he said, as an aside, he's almost like it's a performance. He's doing these lectures, but it's real performative. And he said, and another thing I want to say to you guys, you know, and he's this old smoking, cussing guy that you saw portrayed in Adaptation. He goes, religion is the biggest evil on the face of the earth, you know? And that was yeah. And everyone clapped. Yeah. And okay. So that's what he says. Okay. So he's thinking that all of his story principles here are not religious, obviously, because he thinks religion is the biggest evil on the face of the earth.
Self-evident.
Yeah. So, but that's just cognitively, that's just on the propositional level of what he thinks. Okay. But when he's actually sitting down to write, he needs to use different principles. So when he has his whole day on the thriller, he talks about something called the value at stake. The value at stake is in let's say a love story, it's going to be love versus hate. In a status story, it's going to be pity versus honor. You know, in a thriller, it's life versus death. So everything is going to swing back and forth. When you turn the scene, it's going to be, oh, looks like they're going to survive. Oh, no, looks like they're going to die. Looks like there's going to, you know, that's the value at stake. And so what he says was, and it's absolutely fascinating to me, he says, okay, you've got life and death, but that's not enough of a swing. So you need to also have something here, which is better than just mere survival, and something here, which is worse than just dying. Okay.
Heaven and hell.
He basically put a Dantean landscape onto it. And he said, okay, but what does he do? He has to call it the negation of the negation, or a fate worse than death. That's his version of Hades or damnation. And then you've got this thing that's better than survival, which is his version of paradise.
That's so wild, because that was that moment back when Jordan Peterson had that conversation with Sam Harris. There was a moment where Sam was trying to make that secular argument, like, well, imagine the worst of the worst of the worst, and imagine the best of the best, this utopian and this Hades. And Jordan's just like, yeah, like, I think we all know that's called heaven and hell, you know, like, and it was just like, you know,
yes,
it's so the inevitability of it. You know, the other piece that you know, I bring in these kind of pop culture references. I consider myself very pop, you know, in these spaces. I'm not the nerd necessarily. I'm not the fringe. I'm more, in Grimm's term, I'm much closer to the blue church. But like, I couldn't help but think that like when my kids asked me, when we watched through Marvel a few years, you know, last year, like we went through the whole thing, who's your favorite character? I was like, Tony Stark. I mean, and as you were walking through those, you know, repentance and character change, and when all is lost, and like his character turns, you know, he's kind of the messianic, ends up being the messianic character in that story. But, you know, where does that come from? You know, that I think that's the thing. And it's, and that, you know, that's getting to be, I don't remember when the last one came out. the Infinity War or that series, but it's getting to be almost a decade now, and I don't know, getting away, and there was a kind of explicit move to it seems like to get away from that. Uh, I don't know, and
Get away from what?
well, that's the story. I don't know.
By who to get away?
I don't know. Maybe Hollywood or something.
Oh, just like a trend. I
Yeah,
see.
yeah. It's like,
Uh-huh.
yeah, aren't we tired of this or something? Or I don't know.
Mhm.
That this dude would end up, but it's so compelling. I mean, I remember watching that last when Tony Stark died and Spider-Man's coming. I cried. I cried during that scene, like because it is a long journey, and you see the character arc change, and I had some relations to that, and so I don't know, but my question is, because some of the stuff that you have hit on is that it seems like there's another piece to the hero's journey or something, or that there's something else that maybe that's been forgotten. One of these handheld things, and you've hit on that. I feel like you've hit on that in some other work that you've been doing. That there's another piece. Am I missing that?
No, no, that's perfect. So the way that I'm telling the hero's journey story is, again, like you have to take Carl Jung in terms of what he was trying to stop the bleeding of the meaning crisis, and then Joseph Campbell was his student, and he was kind of, a lot of times when you have one person who starts a movement, then you have someone who organizes the movement a little bit that follows it. It's like Luther and Melanchthon, some people might say, or like a groundbreaking theologian or thinker, and then someone comes along and kind of systematizes it a little bit. So with this monomyth, Joseph Campbell is kind of saying, well, let's see if we can put it all in one, make it all into, like, all stories fit this thing. And then that's what Lucas used. And then when Christopher Vogler wrote a memo at Disney, which was basically an executive summary of the Hero with a Thousand Faces, and started circulating this memo around, which influenced Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and
The
The
Golden
Lion.
Age. Yeah.
Yes. And then it became a book called the Writer's Journey, which is still probably the best understandable version of the hero's journey Christopher Vogler wrote. It was still kind of this one size fits all kind of a thing. It's like, this is the mono myth. So let's just, and what they were doing, I think it is true in terms of talking about the cognitive science part of it, that the way that you process the world is that you step out of your known world and you cross a threshold, and then you get into the unknown, and then you're going to encounter pushback once you cross that threshold. And so there's principles are built in there. But the one thing that Robert McKee then added, and Sean Coyne was his agent at the time that he wrote that big fat book called Story, was to understand what the differences of genres. And so, and putting in that notion of the value at stake and the controlling idea, so that you could understand that while there's certain hero's journey kind of like things going on in just the nature of what a story is, you can't plot out your story based on the hero's journey. It just becomes too generic. And, you really need to have an understanding of the spine. William Goldman calls it a spine. Robert McKee calls it a spine, which is the one value at stake that each scene is going back and forth, whether it's life and death, pity and honor, love and hate, whatever that is. And then what you realize is that we have all these genres that emerge, the Western, the love story. There's 3 types of love story, for example, and then you can sort of get down a little bit more in the weeds and say, we're going to nuance this by genre, and so that's kind of like the story grid system, what Jung, my understanding is. One day I'm going to talk to him, and I'll be able to speak for him a little bit better. Right now, I'm just in the process of consuming everything that they have before I finally feel like I want to reach out to him. But what he did was said, okay, let's focus not so much on the hero's journey. We'll just look at that afterwards and make sure it kind of hits these points, but let's really drill down into the genre that you've chosen. If you're writing in thriller, here are the genre conventions and obligatory scenes for thriller. If you're writing a romance, here are the 3 types of romances, and whichever one you choose, here are the genres and obligatory scenes for that. And then right around 2017 or so, he came out with this thing called he calls the Heroic Journey 2.0, putting in all of this cognitive science stuff, because I know he's reading all the same people that John Vervaeke is reading. And his Heroic Journey 2.0 is even better than Vogler's version of the hero's journey. And so that is kind of like where now I am in terms of my understanding of the hero's journey, is taking Sean Cohen's Heroic Journey 2.0 and everything else that I know about story and everything I know about theology, and seeing, okay, what's edible and what's not here on a larger level to make a model. Basically, I want to be able to sort of like, here, let's not have it hinder us. The model should make your work better and not hinder you. And so I think Sean's is an update from Campbell to Vogler to Sean Cohen. And I have a couple things that I think I can contribute to that model on top of that, just in virtue of my theological training. There's nobody really reading the Bible, very few people reading the Bible looking for this stuff right now. And I'm kind of exploring that. So I feel like I can maybe update it. I'm not exactly sure if I can tell you specifically what that is right now, because I'd have to explain the Heroic Journey 2.0 to you. And so I'm still in the middle of it, but that's kind of where I'm at.
One of the things that you mentioned with the idea of that spine, and you had a recent tweet about this, I think, is that connected to the Maslow's, like,
yeah,
a little bit?
Yeah, well, that's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. See, Sean uses the stages of grief, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, these psychological models really do help you sometimes, because what the psychologists are doing is they're finding a pattern on all of these different people that come to them for therapy, and they're using that on people's real life experiences. And then when you have a story, you'll find, oh yeah, the stages of grief, quite often, it's not going to be believable if the character experiences a loss and they don't go through those stages. We'll notice, yeah, it seems like you would have first bargained and then you would have accepted, etc. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is another one where it's a nice book. It's a field guide, but you want to know, okay, out of these stages, which ones are edible and which ones maybe aren't. And what I noticed with Maslow was the bottom ones, because again, you have to think of the whole psychological, I think of the whole psychological discipline of the 20th century as being cut off from that religious metaphysic. So that means that they can only go so high when it comes to the telos of the human being. Like, what's the purpose? For Jung, it's individuation. For someone like Maslow or some of these other mid-century psychologists, it's just going to be health. Like psychological and emotional health. Maybe you could say spiritual health, but not in the fullest sense of it, I would say. So if you go on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's physiological. That's right. That's the lowest need. If you're not alive, nothing else matters. Then the next one is safety. Safety's, that's true. Like, if you're not safe, then you're not going to be out there doing your paintings. You're not going to be able to have those higher level ones. Then it's social. That's true as well, I think. Then it gets up to the higher ones. And the next one is self-esteem. And then the highest one is self-actualization. Okay. And that's where I'm saying they're hitting a ceiling. These psychologists, they're hitting a ceiling. And I can say, look, let's just open that up. Let it go even higher. And so rather than saying self-esteem, why don't we say worthiness as the next stage? Because really, and this is true in story, when someone wants honor, that what they really want is to deserve the honor. That's why you don't fly a helicopter to the top of Mount Everest and then dance around on the top of it. You climb all the way up. That's the next stage in the hierarchy of needs.
I had this experience where I lost. You talked about honor. I lost honor. I lost respect. For myself, from my community, from all these things. And when I took a really hard class, when I was having to start a new career, and I did really well, I was anatomy and physiology. uh, I felt like I gained some self-respect. Like I did something that, and I didn't. What was um the pop psychology word that's in the Maslow's that you said, the
Self-esteem.
self-esteem. I don't even, I
Mhm.
don't know what that, I don't, to esteem yourself, like it's like, oh, no, I respected, like I respected the work that I did to get the grade. I respected the professor who taught me and was rigorous. Like, and that was I don't know if I'd ever experienced that. Like, wow. I in all of these other places in my life, I don't feel like I have respect, and I lost it. And that's true. And that's right. But in this, like, I felt like I gained a sense of self-respect that I had lost in that Maslow's and in that journey. And, so I think that that's true. Like you said, worthiness. Like, was I a worthy student? Was I a worthy, um, person in this? And I, I, I feel like our culture, you can give people esteem, like, oh yeah, you're great, kid, and it's like doesn't if they did not earn the trophy, you talk about the trophy culture and stuff like, then that's actually detrimental to the person. And so like if that's the ceiling you're talking about, I think that's definitely true. And it's like, oh, just positive self-talk. No, you need to earn your respect as a whatever, as an athlete or a student or a storyteller or maker. And so that is, and that can only come from like a true work, a true endeavor, I guess you could say. So that's
Right.
how that
So,
hits me.
yeah, exactly. And imagine if you're writing a story. Okay, now if you go on the hierarchy of needs, down at the bottom, that's going to be action or horror, survival or not. Then the
Right.
next level up, is going to be, that could be suspense, that could be thriller, safety. The next level up, social. You could talk about a social voyage in return, the need to, relationship type stories. But then when you get up to that level of the esteem level or the dessert um, uh, level, notice how you have to know that you can't have the trophy version, the participation trophy version, and have that be a good story. I'll give you a perfect example. Is there's a great episode in Seinfeld where Kramer accidentally receives a Tony Award. Right? Did you see that episode? I don't know if you watched Seinfeld.
I watched quite a bit with my parents growing up. So yeah, I don't
So
remember that.
he goes to the Emmys as a seat filler, or the Tonys as a seat filler, and then he accidentally gets swept up on stage and he gets the Tony Award, and then he parties all night, and he's like, "Yes, I won the Tony Award" or stuff. And they said, Kramer, you don't deserve that. And he's like, "But why?" Well, you had nothing to do with the production. So then the rest of the episode, guess what the rest of the episode is? He has to do something to deserve the award. So the producers come to him and say, "Listen, we're going to take that reward from you unless you do us a favor." And it's like, anything to keep this. And they said, "Okay, you have to fire Raquel Welch because she's so mean. None of us wants to talk to her." So then he has to go, "No, I don't want to do that," or whatever. And then he has to, but by the end, Raquel Welch scratches him all up. And he has that award. And he's won it. He deserves it now. Right.
Yeah. Sorry, that character, man, he was gold. He was absolute TV
Yeah.
gold. Man, that's interesting. And so if we have a culture that's telling us something like self-esteem culture, get just positive talk, like, oh, you deserve this because you're you or whatever. Um, and that's what we're supposed to believe, but then it doesn't ring true. Like you're saying, so that's getting to that top, that these stories that of meaning that we're trying to do, because we live in a decadent society for the most part. All of our Many of our needs are met, with survival and all these things. And so if we're trying to get to the existential question, I guess, of purpose is something related to that. And you think that what's an example of Hollywood stalling out on that? Do you think? Could you?
Well, this is what I'm saying, though. Similar to Robert McKee, where he'll say one thing, but then when he goes to make his story work, he needs to smuggle those concepts back into it. It's the same thing with this. Like, you might say, yes, I think that self-esteem, I agree with Maslow. I mean, I might be getting Maslow wrong. I don't know. But the pop version of that. You might say that. And again, there's different reasons why you say things. You say it for status. You say it because it's a fashionable belief. You say it because you never really thought about it and you're just whatever. But when you're actually having to deal with the grooves of creation, meaning like the actual data and sense experience of life, you're going to work through it and you'll discover these patterns. And so you may not, I don't know whoever wrote that episode of Seinfeld, if they would have said, well, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I actually would tweak that one. You know, I mean, no, I don't think so. So there's a sense that the artist, it happens in music, it happens in visual arts, it happens in storytelling, where they just sometimes have to go away from that, from what everyone's saying. And it might even be a disconnect in their own mind, you know, like they're just not, those two parts of their brain are not talking to each other. You know, Robert McKee would not probably make the connection that I'm making if I went up and talked to him and said, because I did go up and talk to him in the break, and he's a very, very opinionated guy, you know, like he would not want to learn a lesson from the likes of someone like me, a student like me. So, you know, I think that's why you find all of these movies that go, wow, that is really profound. That something really profound got in there. And the writer, the filmmaker, there's all of this other stuff going on in the social imaginary. There's a term that people use called the theological imagination that's passed down to you, so that like there's a sense of a Catholic imagination, a Protestant imagination, and it doesn't matter if you're practicing that religion. It's still, those patterns are still playing out in your imagination. So my goal here is not to necessarily say that you need to think about this in order to tell a good story, but maybe I can save you some time, because you don't have to do trial and error. You know, like you don't have to do, wait a minute, that doesn't work. Why doesn't that work? You know, and then you try something else and eventually you find what works. You know, this is also the story grid guys, but they want to take someone that takes 10 years to become a top tier novelist and compress that down to, you know, maybe 1 or 2 years, you know, something like that, where it's like, we're just going to try to clarify the terminology a little bit, to take away some of those rabbit trails that might cause you to waste a bunch of time in trial and error, realizing that that's not the right path to go down, and get to a higher level of storycraft faster.
So story grid is centered around writing, like a novelization and stuff. So you're trying to like do something adjacent with cinema and video. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. I think that you know, if you might not be so concerned with the line by line, you know, craft of the writing if you're writing a screenplay, you know, but all of the principles from the story grid apply to screenwriting. And you know, I just think it's the best that I've found in terms of actually just going, okay, this is kind of like what you need to do to figure out if it's, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say like the first draft when you're super creative and you're like, I have this idea and I want to write it down. But then when you go to revise it, the main problem that I have with my own work or the work of my friends or my students is, well, how do you know that when you've gone from draft 1 to draft 2, it's not just different? How do you know it's better? You know, that's really the question. And they've come up with a wonderful set of evaluative tools that will help you understand what makes it better, what makes it level up from where you had it.
Making sure you're hitting the right beats. And so I still want to go back to maybe if an example of this, because, you know, if we're talking about the meaning crisis, we're talking about purpose, and again, like in this decadence, like, maybe this would be a way to get at it. Like, what's a, you know, I mean, we have the Christ story, but are there other stories that you think get to that point, you know, like you're saying, like bringing in the biblical or the theological, that's being, you know, ignored all the way since, you know, the 20th century or whatnot? Like, what would you say is a good example of that, maybe in scripture or something?
So like to get to the top of those, okay, let me tell you how I finish out Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so that we kind of know.
Okay.
So it goes survival, and then it goes safety, and then it goes social, and then I'm putting, instead of self-esteem, I'm putting what did I say? Not desert, but worthiness. Okay, and then the top one is going to be telos, or purpose, instead of self-actualization.
Okay.
Now I don't know. Maybe there again, like, could you tweak the term self-actualization to actually mean what I want it to mean, which is the ultimate human flourishing, thriving, and fulfilling your calling, and displaying your gift, using your gift and calling to its highest potential in how you've been created. Could self-actualization mean that? Maybe, but it seems it's too low to me. It just doesn't quite go high enough, because there's no, it seems like it stops with just health. I'm a healthy, integrated person, but it doesn't say about what the wider purpose you have in the world. So telos, or purpose, would be the top. So I think that I'm not going to go all the way back to the Bible. I'm just going to go back to Shakespeare.
Okay.
As an example of Shakespeare doing it very well. So a tragedy goes from top to bottom. So it starts with meaning and purpose and goes all the way down to death. So in Othello, Iago is the devil, the figure, and he has a plan to devolve Othello all the way down from where he is as king, and having all of that potential and telos to rule, all the way down to death. And what he's going to do is he's going to do it by doubt. So it's an anti-faith, it's an undoing of faith story. So first he doubts Desdemona, and because he doubts Desdemona, he doubts his own judgment. And because he doubts his own judgment, he doubts his decisions in war. Because he doubts his decisions in war, he doubts his value as a man. And because he doubts his value as a man, he starts to doubt his own baptism. And there's this great speech that Iago gives of saying we have to make him doubt his baptism, because that's damnation. Because if his baptism, the efficacy of his baptism didn't work, then that's the negation of the negation that Robert McGee talks about. It's a fate worse than death. It's worse than, so he's going from the very, very top of purpose, telos, down to esteem, status, down to safety, down to the physiological, and all the way down into death, and then down in even farther than that, down all the way to damnation. And Shakespeare does it. He does it in Romeo and Juliet as well. There's a sense of the values are more extreme when you open it up. You don't have that ceiling on there, So today, people will still try to have, for example, a fate worse than death, but it will be something like having to live with a mistake that you made on your conscience for the rest of your life. That's worse than dying. It would be better if you just died than to, maybe a survivor's guilt kind of thing, So people still use it in storytelling, but Shakespeare could go ahead and just use the symbol of baptism. And that is a symbol that works better if you know what baptism is, like that if I had made a movie today and I said, well, I'm going to have this scene where he doubts whether or not his baptism worked. People are like, what do you, that doesn't,
Yeah, it's the truth of that is that, which is like, as a Christian, it's like, well, that shouldn't be funny, but it's funny to think about Hollywood taking that seriously. And I guess that's kind of the point of not even being able to get there. It's so comical almost that to be able to think that, whereas in Shakespeare, that's such a reality to the world, that would get to that. I mean, it's a psychological point too that you're getting to.
Well, it also has to do with
a great example with the Othello, because the way that I was hearing that, I was also hearing kind of like Iago was playing the role that postmodernism has played in our culture. And it's like the popular term of deconstruction. He was deconstructing him as a person down to deconstructing his soul. And I think that's really powerful. I didn't know the finer points of Othello, so that's really
Well, no, it is also has to do with what faith is, and really one of the lessons of Othello is that faith is actually what holds you together, because you can't verify everything.
Yeah.
You can't. So if you're going to have in his relationship with Desdemona, you have to have faith in order for that relationship to have a solidity to it. So all you have to do is take away the faith, his faith in Desdemona, and now it starts to everything unravel. So the faith in when in your marriage, the faith between the two of you is analogically the same as your faith in God.
The fractal.
And so he's showing how faith goes all the way from the bottom. Faith is what actually causes you to be able to function in life on the day-to-day level. And it goes all the way up to God, and the modern person thinks of, well, no, in ordinary life, I don't use faith.
Right.
I use reason. I use but that's not true. You use faith all the time. And when you lose faith, that's when things start to devolve, and it's a powerful illustration of that.
Where would the word trust fit into that? Is there a difference? Is there, because I feel like I'm just curious, like fidelity and trust, like does trust, there's a connection there between not only his faith, like, but the trusting of the other, that they're like in that, I guess the relational, that would be a part of not just Othello's journey, but I guess in our lives, that there's a relationship, it seems like to be at every aspect of that, the king and his subjects, and the man and God and his baptism and whatnot. So I wonder if that's where, like, the faithfulness or the faith that we can have, maybe trust is like believing that the other person also is having faith in us or something like that. Maybe.
Yeah, I would put it like, okay, you have the set of facts that and then there's what you don't know. Okay. And so the faith is that underneath everything is, let's say, goodness. And so when you're in the middle of it, of your life, where you can only see so far, and it all looks like something else, so in Othello's case, gosh, the handkerchief, I found this handkerchief, that seems to point to her doing this or whatever, right? That's all the facts available to him. But what he never considers is something called the unknown unknown. There's something beyond all of the things that you've considered. Maybe there's more options than that, So this is the lesson at the end of Ecclesiastes and at the end of Job, which is the existence of the unknown unknown, or the numinous. It's the existence of the world outside of the frame, that even all the possibilities that you considered. Job learns, maybe there's more than I know. And that means that I can never completely close off that doubt. I can never completely say, well, okay, I have all the evidence here. It seems like Desdemona is cheating on me, Othello says. Now a faith in the goodness of being underneath that would say, well, or analogously, let's say there's a relationship of trust between Othello and Desdemona, and it would be like someone comes to you and say, okay, I have all this evidence here, and this is what your wife did, this, and you think, okay, that evidence is pretty damning, but underneath that, I have this faith, and so I'm going to say there must be something unknown out there that explains this. It's very similar to what Abraham says when he's told to sacrifice Isaac. What does he say? He goes, well, I guess I got to do this, but there must be something that I'm missing here that's outside of how the options I think I have, and that's the religious life, I think, or at least the Christian and Jewish life, is these constant lessons of what your relationship between you and the infinite, or you and the divine, where you are reminded of your finitude. And you're saying, okay, in order to live as someone who is finite, you're always having that limited frame, and you're always having this relationship between the unknown and the unknown unknown. And if you have faith, that means that you think, like Karl Barth says, God's yes always swallows his no. So there's a sense of like, underneath it, the I am, the ground of being, is good. So even though I'm getting all this evidence to the contrary, I'm still going to go on. Sean Coyne is not a believer, but what he uses a phrase from Samuel Beckett where Samuel Beckett says, when the character reaches the all is lost moment, they say, I cannot go on, I will go on. All of the options are gone, but you still go on. So Coyne has a very Petersonian sense of, even when you reach that point where all is lost and you think, gosh, there's no way forward, you're Jonah in the belly of the whale, you still go on, because that's better than believing that the world is not good ultimately. And so there's a sense of, he doesn't know for sure, Sean Coyne, and neither does Peterson, but they say when you finally reach that all is lost moment, you still have faith in the goodness of being at the bottom of things, because that's the way, and that's just what you have to do. Now, I think if you're a Christian, you can say, well, it's not just a blind faith in the goodness of being, and it's just, if I didn't believe that, then everything would dissolve into nihilism, but it still might be true. You can say, well, no, these stories, if you look at Abraham and you look at Jacob and you look at Job and you look at Ecclesiastes and you go on and on, or even you look at Peter and the Savior has just died and he's by the fire and everybody says, weren't you the guy with him? And he goes, no, even he found, wow, I just never considered that the way would be that he would rise from the dead. That's the unknown, or, and I call it the deep magic. The deep magic is the unknown on the good side, the eucatastrophe truths out there. That's what you're having faith in ultimately. Yeah. When you're able to go on in the face of these counterexamples.
Yeah, it's funny. I use that term, like what is the deep magic of that Aslan speaks of in Lewis, or something like there's a deeper magic than what because that's even a great point when Aslan's dying. That's obviously analogous to Christ and everything, but that all is lost moment, that there's something to believe that there's something good, the eucatastrophe, that there's hope, and to trust in that. That is a powerful moment. Man, I had a lot of thoughts going through there. There's so much going on, but I guess that is, you mentioned there the Petersonian thing, that is something that we're as a culture we've talked about already. The Nietzschean nihilism that was trying to be fought with this humanistic way through psychology, and then we come to this point and asking that question of because wrapped up in that question is kind of the problem of good and evil, is why does evil exist in the world, and then asking the question, I guess, that one step further on Maslow's, maybe with telos and purpose, is maybe there's something on the other side of this that I just can't see. But I'm going to choose to believe right now. And yeah, that is, I mean, that is the powerful story. That is the hopeful story. And maybe that is the like, that makes me think about believing that Darth Vader is redeemable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the eucatastrophe, the eucatastrophic ending, that's a real, that's something that sticks around when you have this faith underneath. I mean, of course, like the most famous example is Gollum in Lord of the Rings, where there's a sense of like, well, I don't know why Gollum exists. Frodo says, he should have killed him. And Gandalf says, well, I don't know. Maybe there's more than you know. Maybe he's got a part to play. You don't know that, Yeah. And it's similar to Darth Vader, that's why I now kind of like nuance my sense of the antagonist. I'm toying with this idea as the antagonist is not necessarily the person who you think of the antagonist, like Darth Vader or, the killer or something, but rather a principality that possesses that person for a time. So you can think of Darth Vader as possessed by this principality, but he wakes up at that one moment and he kind of like comes to his senses, And I see that in stories all the time. There's a great scene in The Devil Wears Prada where Meryl Streep in that movie is the devil. And it's very obvious, that's the metaphor they're using. But there's a moment where she wakes up and you see the real Miranda, Meryl Streep's character, and it's after she's had a divorce and she's not wearing any makeup, so she's taken off the mask of that super powerful fashion figure, and she's been clearly been crying, and Anne Hathaway comes to her house and she sees that vulnerability and she sees, oh my gosh, if I continue down this path, I'm going to wind up like her with no relationships and only power. Only power is the only relationships I have with people. No equal relationships. And so then she snaps out of it and she goes, oh, okay, now we got to figure out the seating arrangement for this because, now my husband won't be there. And she just gets repossessed by that principality again. And so Anne Hathaway's choice in that movie is, am I going to let this thing possess me or not? And you have that choice, and for me, it helps in writing a story that way, because you can think, okay, I don't have to think of this one figure as, okay, that's the antagonist. I can say, well, no, what is the narrative of the principality that's possessing that person? And if I know what that narrative is, then now I can have it tempt all of these different characters within the story, and their little arc is going to be whether or not they take the bait,
That makes me think of this. There's kind of been a theme in recent years of the complicated villain, and it's not what you're talking about. It's like, they're really no different from the protagonist. They're the same actually. And that they're just they've got their own problems, and the protagonist has its own problems. And you see this in like Turned Upside Down and things like Prime's The Boys, or about the hero, things like that. But even I was trying to think I think there's been critiques of this new Lord of the Rings series where which I haven't watched, but I haven't watched it. the orcs are just, they're foreigners in a lost land. They're not a personification of a zombie-ic evil or something, and I don't know. I like the twist that it seems like maybe that you're putting on that, where no, you could look at Darth Vader and be like, no, he's totally possessed right now. So he is a personification of evil right now. But that doesn't mean that he always will be a personification of evil, but he can be. Mm-hmm. And that's a more clear vision for that. Trying to be nuanced, and when you're trying, and then you like nuance it all the way into, well, they're not evil at all. There's this like, they're just misunderstood, So,
well, I think this is another thing of cutting off the religious metaphysic. If you don't believe in principalities, now people can believe in principalities again because of the notion of the egregore and all of this. People are starting to bring it back. But if you don't believe in possession in some sense, or principality possessing, or if you don't take seriously the idea from St. Paul, we battle not against flesh and blood, if you go to the Martin Luther King Memorial and you look at his 6 or 9 principles of nonviolence, that's the one that you'll see there on the plaque. It'll say, we're not fighting against the people. We're fighting against this thing that's possessing the people. I don't remember exactly the words he uses, but yeah. And he says, that's why anybody can be an ally in our task. Martin Luther King Jr. says. So that's another thing where I just think, hey, let's bring back the notion of a principality in a story, because again, the storytellers are using that idea. The speech, I love, one of my favorite parts of a movie where you have a central antagonist like that is the speech that they give justifying their narrative, So most of the 20th century, it's a kind of a blend of Nietzschean nihilism with Nazi propaganda. That's usually the narrative that the antagonist has. So you could say that's the principality, is that narrative. And Voldemort says to Harry, there's nothing except for power, and the world is divided up between those who are courageous enough to use the power and those who are cowards. Wow. So that's right out of Nietzsche, saying what is good is what gives you more power, and what is evil is what causes weakness. And so the narrative then is what tempts Harry. Harry says, well, I could go the way of Voldemort, and that would be basically imbibing this principality, or I could resist it. But he has to have the resources to resist it, which come from his friends and his mentors, that the other side. And so it shows kind of like a spiritual cosmic battle going on between let's say the principality of Dumbledore and the principality that's possessing Voldemort, and for me, it just helps because now I can, in the beginning of every movie, you don't usually meet the actual antagonist until you get to the third act. So what's the conflict in the beginning? Well, it's these little figures that are surrogate antagonists or something, little mini versions of the antagonist that are basically possessed by the same spirit. That really helps me kind of like give it a coherency. So I can say, okay, if I can kind of work out that narrative of what I want the narrative of the antagonist to be, then I can say, okay, this is pretty much what our protagonists are going to be tempted with and sort of fighting with on the spiritual level as we go through.
So when you're watching a movie, like, you have a much deeper sense of the technical aspects of story that are playing out, and still you're evaluating those things. Is it hard to just sit back and enjoy a story sometimes that way? Like if I'm, this is good, the action was good, and yay, this was cool, and there's kind of more of a binary, like, oh, this is good movie. But you're as someone that has like a very technical view on it, like, is it hard to just enjoy a film sometimes as a story? I don't know if that, or
No,
are
yeah,
you enjoying the craft? Like, maybe you've getting to a place where you're enjoying evaluating the craft of it, I guess, maybe.
No, I can enjoy movies. I mean, the thing about it is that, again, like, the creative spirit is such that it's doing all of these things. The imagination, the creative spirit, and all that stuff is doing things that the creators don't know about. It's coming from it's collective imaginary, or it's coming from somewhere, coming from the culture, coming from, this larger thing. And so I find amazing things, I think, in movies that the filmmakers maybe not even thought of. And it's because they're tapping into that, because the world is full of all these patterns, full of all these symbols, and full of meaning. And the artist is really kind of uncovering that. And so, no, I mean, I don't like we were talking, I think, last time, where the storytellers that are ideologically captured and they're forcing that ideology onto the story, that becomes more obvious and annoying for me. And so I don't watch some of that stuff,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not one of these people to go out there and critique things and say it's wrong. I just, if I don't like it, I just don't pay any attention to it.
See, so we haven't really hit this directly, but so you were getting into, you took this trajectory to try to get into the industry and into film and be a part of that. Like, was there a time where you considered yourself, I think I'm a creative person, or I think I'm on a journey of creativity, or has this been something that grew over time later on? Like, would you have thought of yourself as being in the creative, as a creative, as a part of an identity?
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe. Yeah, I've always been, creative on the writing and storytelling side. I feel like documentaries are a similar task of making meaning out of the anecdotes, the details of life. But my day job has been on the technical side, which is creative too, because you're dealing with light and color and, all that stuff. And I think that probably what I feel more drawn to is the meaning side rather than the expression. I do the expression for a living a lot of times. But I feel like a sense of calling, like my strength, like you can prop up your weaknesses and you can be competent at your weaknesses. And so as a cameraman, I'm just as good as anybody else, I would say. But the meaning side is really drawing me, and so, but it takes time, it just takes time to get, I had to study a bunch of philosophy and theology and, and just really to reconcile the deep fragments that we have in our culture between all of these things, we were talking about like the psychological realm. And then is that just completely separate when you wander into a church and it's just like two different parts of your brain, like there's a lot of stuff that is very difficult to work out these days. I mean, if this was during the time of Dante, if we were living then, the church would be right in the center of the town and all of that art in there would be the story that we live inside, and we'd read Dante's Divine Comedy and it would line right up with that, and all the music and everything would all be like integrated, but here we are in this more fragmented world. And so it's harder to find your place and your creative voice. And, you might need to find a niche or something. I'm sure you feel that with your music, like where do you,
Yeah. I mean, that's been a journey. I think I've written 1.5 songs in 8 years, recently, because, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but this journey is the creative journey I'm on right now is connecting to what is true in the sense of facts. Like we hit on that with kind of, you were touching on the idea of combinatorial explosiveness. Like we can't know everything. And some of the things we know, we may not even really know and all that kind of stuff, but that, it sounds, be you, just, be true to yourself, the pithy statements, but I don't think I could really, I didn't even care about that. I was like, well, I want to know what's true. Is God real? Show me the facts, and this, the idea of yours truly is getting more into this. I've talked about it, being like like a vibration, a frequency, but also like you talk about getting into the grooves of these patterns and more of the way of a true way of a with integrity, with wholeness. And it's interesting because the way that you frame, our society used to have a lot more of a congruent story that everyone lived in, and it has been deconstructed so much with, and I guess with whatever, the principality of postmodernism and even these modernists that they weren't deconstructing for necessarily the sake of power, but like one of the things that came up while you were talking about the more modern figures, like within psychology and taking these pieces, it's like they're not like trying to tear things down necessarily for the sake of power, but more for like study or like, that's the atomization, like getting all the way down, like, and in my first conversation with you, we hit on it earlier in this one. You talk about the confessor, and we went through the stuff with Jung. That was really insightful to me because having spent time in part of like the modern church and its framework, outside of some of the more historical strains, is when you hit on that idea of confessor, and I was like, we are, I think, a big part of the meaning is a lot more of reintegration of this atomization, and so as far as with like music, I don't know, as an art form, like I kind of am, I'm I'm using some of the technical stuff to create a space to be able to dialogue maybe more. That's the creative it's like I'm trying to, instead of craft a song, I'm trying to craft, conversation, and use that as a vehicle to learn, but also to reintegrate like a lot of these things. Um and the thing, to go back to the psychological bifurcation with Freud and Jung, and that we talked about in our first conversation, that I saw was revelatory, is like, my wife is actually studying to be a therapist right now. And like, we're not going to have priests in the evangelical or Protestant churches anytime soon, but I think we need therapists and I think that is kind of like, uh, bringing that into, reintegrating that office in a way that it's not going to be the same, but because it wasn't like you said, it's like, oh, well, that's psychobabble, like, no. There's grips that we actually let go of, that they took. They said, no, this is good, and the church was like, no, you can have it in a way, it seems like. And so, I like the pattern of the reintegration of a lot of things that we've lost, and meeting people from different traditions and in different spaces creatively, continuing to piece that project together, I guess. And I don't know, that's why it's exciting to have these conversations. And so, yeah, I don't know how I kind of got all there, but thinking about creativity with my music has been, I've done some musical things with the studio, but this has been the thing that like kind of hit for me to just like go forward creatively, and it's made sense, I guess. In a
You mean your podcast?
Yeah, getting on here doing this. So,
Yeah.
and yeah, go ahead. I don't know if you.
No, I mean, it's sort of like the difference between a doctor and a CrossFit instructor. Like the doctor's saying, "Okay, what's wrong with you? You're sick. Let's stop you from dying."
Yeah.
But then somebody who's like, "Okay, here's how you eat healthy. Here's how
Yeah.
you exercise here. These are things that are going to create a healthy life, which probably will keep you out of the hospital." So there is that kind of relationship between traditional psychology and positive psychology, for example. There's a lot of stuff going on where people are realizing that sometimes psychological and emotional health has to do with, exercising more and eating right, analogically, than it is just trying to fix a symptom when you're sick. But when you're sick and you need something to fix that symptom, you want a doctor, So that's the vocation of the psychologist, who is like the doctor that's going to fix you when you're sick, is definitely a valid thing. But your doctor's not going to go out there and play tennis with you, probably. Like there's room, I think, for, if you're talking about your spiritual health, there's room for these different approaches, I think. And one thing that I'd like to see recovered is that notion of more of a positive health. This is how spiritual health happens. And have it be more than just, I want to get better. I don't want to have these negative symptoms. And stories are things that you. This is why in the Bible they're passed down, is because they're things that you eat and consume, and then you metabolize. And so we kind of know that. That when we make a decision, we decide first and then we rationalize it, you know, like the decision apparatus is underneath the rationalization in some way, somehow. And so how do you change? Like, let's say you have a habit, a pattern of behavior that's maladaptive. And you say, well, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't do that, up in the rationalization, but you can't stop it. You know, well, a story is something that you eat that will actually change that underlying infrastructure. And that's why you're told in the Bible, why they're told, you got to keep telling this story, keep telling the story, because you're metabolizing something that's going to align you better with reality. And that's why it's so important. Maybe that's the reason why I don't watch things I don't like. You know, if I'm like, yeah, it's not very good to eat this, you know, I don't even watch it because I'm looking for the super healthy food to eat, because I know that that is what actually changes you from the inside. It makes you make decisions in the world before you even thought about it. You know, that's the weird thing about it.
I love that part about digesting healthy stories. I've really taken that to heart. In, you know, I'm kind of a part of this little home church right now, and one of the ways, it doesn't have Sunday school, but one of the ways, like, and I'm so like adamant about this, is we just read it. We do it from one of these storybook Bibles, but like we have a part in the liturgy where a person comes up and we read a Bible story, like as a story, you know, not necessarily like scripture, but as a story. And because I believe that it is like, I mean, I feel like a Bible story, like the story of Abraham and Isaac, I feel like saved my life. And so like, that I think that that's another piece of something sometimes that has been lost, is like, oh, well, you know, again, kind of going back to this, like the facts and his, like only the science of it without the story. And it's like, well, the story doesn't matter if we can't prove the science or something like that. And that good stories, like, you know, even, you know, bring back some of these characters, like that was the theme of Jordan Peterson's ARC conference, was like, tell better stories. Like we need to tell a positive vision for the future. And even Paul Vanderklay recently in one of his videos, he talked about trying to define, like, say, these people that make YouTube channels or something by what you're against. If you're just that, then you don't have a positive vision. And it reminded me of all the new atheists that like deconverted everybody, and it's like, all right, now what? You know, was Dawkins was like, what was the bus slogan thing that he said, like, go out and live your life now? It's like, well,
Yeah.
you know, it's like God's probably not real, so get on with your life. And it's like,
yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
and that's it. That's like, that was his most positive vision for the future. So
yeah, no, I mean, I think that one of the things that a good story does is it highlights the idea, the protagonist at a certain point will discover their gift, and the gift and the call to adventure and the gift are related, you know, and that's really what I think people may not. There's a sense of, oh, you're unique, you're valuable and stuff in our culture, but this idea of a gift that you're given, which then puts you on a mission, because it's the parable of the talents. You've been given this. Now you need to maximize that. You just bury it, then the creator is going to be mad at you. You know? And so there's the call to adventure, you know, in the beginning of the hero's journey is really a call to recognize a gift that they don't know that they have yet. And then there's a certain point in the story where they realize their gift. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm the only one who can do this, because I'm the only one that was given the gift, you know? So it's like Moses saying, wait, what do I have to do? It's like, you know, yeah, you know, this is your gift. And it's like, well, is it a gift or is it a curse?
a burden, yeah.
You know, but that's what, you know, I mean, the best story, you know, Tony Stark, you mentioned Tony Stark, you know, what's his gift? Well, he's super good with all this technology and stuff. He starts out in the beginning, the first movie, completely selfish, you know, using his gift only for that. Then he realizes, oh, well, maybe the reason why the creator of the universe gave me this gift is because I'm supposed to do something with it. I better find out what it is I'm supposed to do, you know, and the world of that protagonist expands. And that's how our lives are. You know, you're going to find that you have a gift, and then you're going to say, well, I'm supposed to use this gift.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's that's this studio, like maybe hopefully this is, I appreciate that. I mean, I don't think you were maybe you were, maybe you weren't necessarily speaking to me, but that was real encouragement, man. Well, dude, we're kind of rounding out on our time here today. Like, I don't know if there was anything that we've missed, that you were hoping to kind of cover, or, if you had anything, you wanted to bounce off of me or anything like that.
No, I mean, I'm grateful that you let me ramble. I'm in this point now where I'm going like deep into my own head and world and research and coming up for air, and so it's nice to have a dialogue partner for that to come out.
Yeah. That is, I mean, when you reached out to me this time, you're like, it felt good to be like, yeah, we can use this space to help you on this, because I believe in what you're doing. I mean, that's kind of part of this little corner of the internet, I think, is like the relational side of it across space, because we don't have to be in the same space to do some of this work together, and that's been a fun, and because it brings purpose to what I'm doing, like that part of the teleology of it all. So yeah, man. Well, I'm glad that it made sense for you to do that. And we'll keep going on this journey, and kind of follow along as these things continue to progress. Hopefully it'll manifest into, like you said, maybe you're working on a book, and continue like up some relational people of influence to take this and give it give our culture a better diet of story. So
Yeah, we'll see where it goes. I mean, there's a lot of people in the corner, as you say, who have a very specific mission, and they're doing really well with it. Like Jonathan is doing the fairy tale storytelling, the symbolism. Martin Shaw is really doing, here's how you take a story that you've been given and faithfully pass it on. There's different kind of roles that people are recovering, and inspiring people to do. And exactly, mine is still a little amorphous. Is it film school? Is it, exactly where is my contribution to that? But I feel like it's lines up very similar to what everybody else is trying to do. And so, I'll just keep you posted.
All right, man. Well, till next time, man. Appreciate you reaching out and come back on, Justin.
Yeah. Thanks, Christian.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.